Welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming. I'd like to open this video with a news bulletin for the YouTube RPG Brigade, as I intend to open all of my interviews, and this one is to announce the return of the not long ago disappeared member of our community, Dungeon Master Johnny. Now, I know it'll make him quite happy to have his channel promoted in a video such as this one, so here's to you, Johnny, and your every future success. I'm sure Ed will agree with me. And, you know, I've just ruined Ed's introduction because I was going to refer to him as my guest until you could guess who he was. But that wouldn't have been too hard. But my guest today needs very little introduction, but I won't let that stop me. As the creator of the Forgotten Realms campaign setting, this man has been one of the most influential figures in fantasy gaming, if I do say so, especially within the role-playing game of Dungeons and Dragons. An accomplished author, my guest has penned many, many role-playing sourcebooks, novels, not to mention short stories, many of which not falling within the typical fantasy genre. To this day, he juggles his freelance writing, editing, multiple show appearances, family life with a job as a library clerk and librarian, as is my understanding. He also spends more time than anyone would ever expect of a creator providing answers to all the realm's lore hunters on the popular and encyclopedic Candlekeep forums, which I thoroughly recommend if you have not frequented them before. A true legend in our hobby, he has been diligently entertaining us with his work since his first Forgotten Realms article was published in Dragon magazine in 1979, all those years ago. And it gives me a great deal of pleasure and pride to say, Ed Greenwood, welcome to the Gentleman's Guide to Gaming.
Thank you. Thank you. Nice to be here. You've made me feel very welcome. Jeez, you know, man of such accomplishments. Now I could just sit here.
Yeah, well, that's the end of the interview, sir.
Oh, okay. Well, it was great. I'll just go back to my hole now.
That wouldn't be a bad way of living in Canada, I suppose. Holes in the ground. I'm not saying all Canadians should be buried alive, but the geothermal side of it. But I digress.
Yeah. No, digressions are my life. Well, that'd be a great idea.
I'd like to start by asking you, quite simply, what can you tell us about your current projects, both within and without the role-playing field, and what is on the horizon for Ed Greenwood?
Oh boy. Well, the short answer is very little, because almost all of those projects come with NDAs or you know, non-disclosure agreements, little legal agreements not to say much. But I can reveal that the columns that Realms fanciers have been used to on the Wizards website, both forging the Realms just for anybody to see, and the Eye on the Realms as part of the magazines behind the paywall, will continue for this next year. And most of them are written already. I'm having great fun just, you know, racing through them. There will be a Realms novel from me entitled The Herald, which is the last book of the Sundering. The Sundering was announced at Gen Con, so we can sort of talk about that. What's going to be in it? Elminster. What else is going to be in it? I can't reveal much, because for one thing, it's largely not written. And for another thing, the nice thing about the Sundering is things are changing and growing as we go along. So, being as I'm batting cleanup at the end, things are changing as we go. So I really can't say much. Now, I also have a novel coming out from Paizo, which I probably can't reveal much about because I don't think it's really been officially announced. They've just announced that I'm doing one. So that's sort of where we are. I'm also, for the Goblin Works thing, participating in the Emerald Spire Kickstarter thing.
Yes, I noticed that quite recently on Mark Ryan Hagen's, who was my previous interview guest, that he's involved in that as well. Yep, you're both involved in the new Pathfinder MMORPG, which is a leap forward in technology and role-playing terms.
Another way to waste time on the internet.
Yeah.
Excuse me. No, and I did a level of Thornkeep before that for the same project thing. Let's see. I'm also doing tons of other things. One of the things I'm doing outside the Realms and outside gaming, but with a lot of authors that are familiar to gamers. Gabriel Harbawi and I have been doing When the Hero Comes Home, When the Villain Comes Home for Dragon Moon Press, anthologies of all sorts of hero and villain stories, most of them fantasy or science fiction, but there's pulp, noir, there's steampunk, there's horror, there's anything else you want to put in there that we like the story. And we're now doing When the Villain Comes Home too. And in fact, if any of you out there are in a hurry, can write quickly, I believe the open call for When the Hero Comes Home #2 finishes December 31st. So you have a few hours there to sharpen those quills and get in there and send it off to us, and we can put it into print. There are about 40 other projects I'm working on right now, some of which I can talk about, but mainly I can't. One of the places you should look for stuff that I can sort of talk about is if you look at Pelgrane Press and check out Robin Law's projects. The Lion and the Aardvark, which is out in the UK right now, a series of modern fables, sort of as if Aesop with a dozen different voices was alive and writing right now, is just out. And so, of course, I do lots of things that aren't straight D&D. I just did a diesel punk story, and I've done all flavors of fantasy stories and worked on all sorts of things like the Secret Fire role-playing game, just for fun. I'm doing lots of things. And then, of course, there are the deep, dark projects that I murmur about in the depths of night when good people should be asleep. And I will get to later, but I can't talk about at all now. And there are television and film projects amongst them. But my lips are sealed.
Well, I appreciate you telling us all that you have. But but before we start delving too deeply into the realms, in terms of recent works, I very much enjoyed your Falconfar novels. I got them through Amazon. It was I should support my local bookstore, but you know how they're dropping like trees in the Amazon, really. It was refreshing in my mind to see a series where the villains weren't all bumbling incompetents. And I felt
free the code of ethics.
Yeah.
Yes.
I felt the mortality of the protagonists quite keenly in those novels, and just as a, I suppose, point of interest to me and anyone else who's read them, do you intend to revisit that setting?
Oh yes. Now that's the short answer is oh yes. The longer answer is not soon, because I have learned the folly of trying to write more than 3 novels at once and have a life, or try to have a life. You know, part-time job, eating, sleeping, stuff like that. So things are generally at the point where if somebody emails me or calls me up and they're a friend and they want a quick project done, or if I've never met them before and it sounds like a fun, intriguing little project, I will usually say yes and do something. I did one last night. I could polish it off in an hour. And just before he rang me, I was working on my annual Christmas story that I'll read at the library, and I just do that in an afternoon. But if somebody says, oh, well, novel, I say, oh, sorry, I have an agent for novels, you know, and contact him, and he handles it. Whereupon sometimes the enthusiasm drops off markedly, because it goes from, oh, get the author to write something, to, oh, I must pony up money up front. And in the case of Falconfar, the negotiations sort of reached a stage, which is where they are now. Which means, for me, I can't take the time to write the next Falconfar book yet. However, I do have plans. Oh yeah, the story isn't finished, and of course you know how that ended. With certain persons in our world ready to run amok. So, you know, yes, I very much want to get back and write more Falconfar books. I also intend to tell more of the stories of the protagonists. We sort of know Rod, because he's sort of everyman. But his female companion, I'm trying not to ruin it for people who haven't read them yet, his female companion could come across at the beginning as something of a Mary Sue. She's very competent, but somehow needs him.
And not in the traditional sense.
Not in the traditional sense, yeah. But I do want to reveal more about her. And through that avenue, expand the series. And it's also time for some of those villains, or are they villains? Some of them definitely are. That family we met in one of the books, that, you know, with the brother and sister who are capable of just about anything, they're definitely villains. But I mean, I want to explore more of all the people. So instead of being cardboard cutouts that sort of, you know, twirl their mustaches and say, "Ah, I am now about to do something evil on stage in front of you because that is my role, the villain." I want to bring them to, you know, you start to wonder and care about where they're going and what they're doing and how they're progressing as well. And yeah, we'll do more books. And you can see how long-winded I can get for answering a question about Falconfar. So, next!
Well, in terms of Forgotten Realms, obviously it holds a large place in the heart of many a gamer. And what can you tell us about the genesis of the realms and how it has evolved? You see, I've just put genesis and evolution in the same sentence, so I'm quite proud of myself. How it has evolved for you in the last 45 years that you've been playing with it.
Well, the short answer is the realms has become my life. And I started detailing it. I'll get to how I started it in a moment, but I started detailing it because, really detailing it because my players, once I started playing D&D in it, and sort of a regular play started in 1978, although there were play sessions earlier than that, they wanted to know more. They wanted their characters to have day jobs. They wanted, you know, they poked in everything. They had opened boxes in shops. Says, "What's in this? Oh, why? How much does that? Why is it so expensive?" So it was like, oh, geez, Louise, and away we go. So that's what started me detailing it. And as you know from Candlekeep and other places, I work on the realms every day of my life, answering questions because it matters to someone's campaign. And yes, I know they could make it up themselves, but they've got the guy who created it right here. So let's poke him and see what he says. You know, and they want to know about lettuce or about textiles, or, you know, I'm jump into this merchant's wagon. What's in the back of the wagon? Why? Why is he got this? Why is he taking from point A to point B? Or, you know, the famous questions about Realmsian underwear. You know, for lingerie. They started not because it was like going to be a puerile central, but because inevitably you end up with bodies, and inevitably the thief in the party wants to rifle the body. What's it got in its pockets? I want it. You know. Okay. So ooh, here comes some guards. I'll strip this guy, put on his uniform, so I look like a guard. Ooh. Okay, now I've stripped him. What's he got on underneath? It's sort of, the dungeon master has to fill in that gap. Well, he's wearing, you know, silk panties because he has sensitive skin. You know, I don't know. So I have to answer. So I've gone on detailing the realms every day of my life, and I continue to do so. Little things like that, like, okay, if I ask for a drink, how much does it cost? What do I get? And what sort of vessel or glass is it in? When I throw it at the troll's head or face, you know, all this stuff. But that's how it progressed. It started me long before there was a D&D game, just writing short stories, episodic short stories about Myrt the moneylender, who was a fat, wheezing, one-time mercenary captain. So he was Conan, but he was Conan 60 years ago. Now he's way overweight. He can't outrun anybody. He can't outfight too many people, but he's cunning and crafty and knows everything. And he sort of leaves town, and by town I mean city after port city, as he works his way along a coast, which I came to call the Sword Coast, and it came to be Waterdeep and all of the places, and he was moving from north to south, getting to somewhere warmer, just a step ahead of the creditors. And so he was always leaving town, just, you know, and he had to keep moving on. So I had to keep detailing briefly for fiction purposes, port city after port city, and this became the Forgotten Realms before there was a game, and that's how it started. I just followed Myrt along this this landscape. And I built outwards from what I needed for each of those short stories. And those short stories were, the episodic nature of them was inspired by Fritz Leiber's, Fafhrd and Grey Mouser short stories. The way that they were self-contained short stories, but there were also episodes in the lives of these characters. And you see, I came to those sort of things before there were many fantasy books. You read them in magazines. They were serialized, or they appeared with great gaps of time between them whenever the author got another short story ready, the way they originally appeared. So, they had to strike you as complete stories if you were a reader just of that issue. But if you read the magazine regularly, they built up over time this little tapestry of, there's a world behind this. And I wanted to do the same thing with Myrt. So that's how the realm started. There wasn't a D&D game in existence then, but when D&D came along, well, not initially when it came along. When it came along as the 3 booklets and so on, I said, wow, what a cool idea. Oh, everyone's just going to argue about what happens. Oh well. But then when what they called Advanced Dungeons and Dragons came out with the hardcover books, the Monster Manual and the Player's Handbook, then we all had to wait an excruciatingly long time for the Dungeon Master's Guide. But adopting the Vancian system of magic so that everything was detailed, you knew exactly what a mage, wizard, magic user could do. So he couldn't be a sort of Deus Ex Machina, an author's clever, easy solution for fixing everything and ending the story. The magic couldn't do everything. He wasn't sort of an armored tank who came forward and blew everybody away, but he had drawbacks. He or she had drawbacks. I said, oh, good. And I already had the Monster Manual, which took all the monsters from Mythology and some new ones and codified them against each other. You knew exactly how powerful they were, what they could do. Oh, yes, this is what I've been waiting for. So I recast everything in the realms to match D&D without saying so, until, of course, Dragon came along and I started writing for it. And a regular campaign was unrolling. And then I figured it was only fair to the characters in my campaign, the players, to write something and put it in Dragon. If it was a new monster, magic item, or spell, I'd try and get it into Dragon. Now, they wouldn't have their magazines in front of them while we were playing, but everybody in those days read Dragon magazine. So they vaguely recalled what they'd read months or weeks ago. Well, that sort of, in my mind, approximated what their characters might have heard or gathered. So I felt it was a little more fair when throwing new stuff at them. But and from that came the realms, and Jeff Grubb saying, hey, do you have a complete detailed world at home, or do you make it up as you go along? And I said, yes, and yes. And he said, good, send it. And that's how the published realms came to be. As you can tell, I will go on for hours about this. So next.
No, well, it's an exciting
I need
time.
a pint in my hand, and a pub with no closing time.
I'll remember that on the next convention I go.
Yes.
If I can drag you along. But I was going to say it's an exciting time for the realms and Dungeons and Dragons in general, with the advent of D&D Next or 5th edition. Call it what thou wilt. And I understand that obviously this means the Sundering, as you have alluded to, and as I know that you will not be able to go into a great amount of detail on, because there's got to be a product to sell at the end of it. You can't tell us the whole story now, and it's probably still being written, as you say.
Yes, we're not going to have any more realm-shaking events. So, to get there, we have to have another realm-shaking event.
Is it going to be more of a shaking or more of a massage?
How violent are your massages? Do you have large ladies who walk up and down your spine?
I once lived in Norwich in Norfolk in England, and whilst there, this is the strangest tangent I've ever been on in a video, but I'm going to go down it. Whilst there was a BDSM club on the high street. It was completely unmarked. but it had a feature in the local newspaper, and certain of the women that worked there were interviewed for this feature, and they said things like, oh, many people from Norwich come here. Obviously, they don't want their names to be told, but some of them are well known, of course. Some of them have high positions in the local council. One man in particular likes his penis being ridden over by a bicycle. And I suppose that's a form of violent massage.
Yes. There will be no bicycles harmed in the Sundering. Okay. Let me put it this way. There will be dramatic things happening in the Sundering. It is our hope that by concentrating over the shoulders of individual characters, that whether or not those characters are movers and shakers, the chosen, or something of the sort, or whether they are normal Joes whom we have not met before, that we will experience the large-scale changes that happen in the Sundering through their eyes. And so it will be, in other words, instead of a Second World War movie that is all planes racing through the air, tanks firing, and Hitler slamming his fist on the table and screaming things, it's the housewife, or that moment in Hope and Glory, where the local constable is leading the downed German pilot, mind the Brussels sprouts, we're going to be down at that level. Okay. So what we can share with you so far, because it's already been shared, is that the spell plague is coming to an end. And the period of tumult, of large-scale change, is passing away, and the realms is returning to a stability. Won't be the same as it was before, and it will by no means be boring. Oh no. One of the things we've been quietly doing is egging each other on, goading each other into excitement. Oh, we could have a war here, we can have war here, and then dragging each other back, saying, people do have to live in this. They have to get food. They want to go to the outhouse every night and not have 15 spears waiting for their bums up the hole. It should be a place they can live in. So there's not a lot of detail I can go on, but yes, dramatic things will be happening. But it is our hope that it will be the cradle for adventure that it has been for years. But we don't want to have so much happening that adventuring in the realms stops being your fun time. I mean, you have a lousy day at work, something goes wrong, somebody spills coffee on you, the mail gets lost, the newspaper is missing the section you wanted to read, somebody dings your car in the parking lot. You come home, you burn dinner, you finally sit down with your mates to play D&D, and oh my God, now we're into the realms and it's worse than real life. Well, why would you want to do that?
Well, as a big fan of World of Darkness and Call of Cthulhu, I can say that sometimes that is the case. Yeah, you go and play a game and it drives you almost to despair.
But Call of Cthulhu's, and because you're all losing your sanity. That's almost fun. We used to annoy our neighbors up at the cottage in the summer by they were hullabaloos who made noise all day, and so in the middle of the night we'd play Cthulhu by candlelight, and whenever you saw a great old one, you bang out of the cottage, beer in hand, usually wearing almost nothing because it was a hot, sultry summer night, and walk around the cottage going, and of course wake them up. It was great fun. But you see, there's almost the, so yeah, I get your point, but no, we want the realms. The realms has to have, in the same way that the Lord of the Rings movies and the Hobbit trilogy will turn on the fact that the Shire is a lovely place and it's home to a protagonist, and that protagonist, although normally mild-mannered, leading a life of quiet desperation, blah, 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 will, when cornered, fight and do just about anything to protect his home, which is precious to him. We want bits of the realms to become precious to any gamer. So it's your place. You will fight for it. So for one thing, maybe in real life you can't run countries, boot out corrupt politicians, fix things like, I don't know, the banking system, taxation, leaking drains, whatever. In the realms, if you wish to, if you want to do that in your play, instead of just being a marauding freebooter that moves across the country, raping, pillaging, and burning, or maybe changing the order of those three things from time to time, you could actually build something nice, defend it, set yourself up as the local baron, build the castle, rule it justly and benevolently, improve the farms by making sure that the dung gets distributed evenly and that people know about good farming practices, all this stuff. You can do that if you wish. So we want the realms to have nice things. Yeah.
Or indeed, you could choose to be a tyrant. You could choose to build the next Zentil Keep. Zentil Keep Mark 4 now, I think. I don't know how many times it's been destroyed. But
Yes.
Someone doesn't want it there. But I was going to ask about the current situation in the realms politically, magically, and religiously, but given what an expansive world it is, and it feels like a world when you approach the realms, and dare I say, I think that is daunting to some people. Some people would look at the Forgotten Realms just as they would look at something as expansive as, let's say, the World of Darkness, and they would say, wow, there's an awful lot of plot going on here. There's an awful lot of movers and shakers, and what impact can I really have? So it is satisfying to know that the efforts are being made to put the power back in the players' hands and the GM's hands, that they can start carving out parts of that world for themselves. And I think they always could. And ultimately, it's down to the caveat of the GM and the players who are playing. But ostensibly, when a lot of people look in on these developed worlds, they can be intimidated by them because of the sheer number of source books, sheer number of novels.
Oh, sure. And that's a problem. But, to all gamers, let's put it this way. Say you're lucky enough to live in a house that has a backyard. And say you live with someone. Maybe it's your partner, maybe it's your mom and dad, whatever. And they say, let's have a garden. And you say, okay, why? And they say, well, we want to grow our own tomatoes and carrots. Okay, if you know nothing about this, you can look at the neighbor next door who's digging up, and, okay, what's he doing? Okay, you can go to the local library. But if you go to the local library, you're probably not going to take a history of Malaysia, a horror novel, A Life of Queen Elizabeth I and her privateers, and for that matter, a corresponding biography of Philip of Spain and his,
Might be an enjoyable book.
Yeah, all of those things. But we would call those diversions. You'd probably get a book on gardening and maybe on tomatoes or carrots, if you knew nothing. Or, even better, you just muddle through and, talk to the guy down the lane who has one and do it. In the same way, you can approach the realms by saying, oh, geez, there's all this stuff out here. This is way too much for me to buy, way too much for me to learn. Oh, and every time I do something, someone on Candlekeep or somewhere else are going to correct me. They're going to say, ha, you obviously haven't read this obscure novel and this article that Ed wrote 15 years ago that's been hidden at the bottom of a locked filing cabinet, all that stuff. You don't have to worry about that because it's your version of the realms. Just start with the tomato garden. Ignore the rest. I mean, the whole point of all the stuff I do is to answer people's questions who want them answered. You don't have to make your realms match mine or the published realms or what this novelist wrote in this or what this guy wrote in this source book. Now, the one I just did, the Elminster's Guide, is full of little cool things you can take up and use in any campaign. It doesn't have to be the realms. Oh, if you want to know about heraldry or you want to know about some soup recipes, whatever, here they are. But you can just ignore it. In fact, one of the things I want to do when I get around to it, and I hope to have it out before the book was published, and of course, that didn't happen. Welcome to my world. Was do a complete index that we would publish for free on the website that says, do we mention handkerchiefs in the book? No. Or do we mention horses' hooves in the trimming? Yes. And exactly where it is. So you can ignore the rest of the book and just go to what you want. In the same way, in the old days, we picked up Encyclopedia Britannica, and these days, many people type in Wikipedia and find out just what they want, not everything else, because it's so easy to get, I don't want the realms to be intimidating to everyone. But on the other hand, my philosophy has always been, if I have the goal to try and sell you something, I want you to know that I've done the research. I've done the work for you. I've done the thing that you as DM don't have time to do. You barely have time to make sure that chip dip is ready before the people come in the door, and want to start scarfing down your chips. Crisps, excuse me.
Yes. Whatever could he be talking about?
Yes. The weird curries and other dairy thingies that you dip crisps into before stuffing them in your mouth. Okay, you barely have time to do that, let alone do something on the world. We want to have it all ready for you. You can change stuff if you want. And there's also a whole series of people that always get forgotten by the publisher. And I always try and remind them that there are people out there, and I know because I'm one of them. We got to the end of The Lord of the Rings, we devoured those appendices, and we'd sit in bed reading the appendices, spinning new stories, or thinking, what about this? What about that? Why did that line of Rohan end there? Oh, tell me more. Of course, there's nobody alive to tell me more. I mean, certainly I'll buy all the books of notes that Christopher Tolkien puts out, but, the author is dead. There is not going to be anything more. But I'm spinning more. In the same way, there are people who buy Realms game source books and just lie there in bed reading them and imagining their own stories, spinning their own new stories. Oh, what about this? What about that? And part of my job as a writer is to give every dungeon master and every player a, hey, yeah, locks come from somewhere. Let's go to a lockmaker. Let's have him design a whole series of locks and sell them to everybody in Waterdeep that we have the master key. Yeah, that'll be cool. Okay. Now, which traders can we get to take these across the realms? Let's go with one of those traders. All this stuff. So I'm thinking my job is to put that stuff there to make you folks go, oh, hey, yeah, and then run with it. But you don't have to read everything. You don't have to. And now, one of the things they are going to try and do is bring all the stuff, digitally at least, all the second edition stuff, all the third edition, back into print. So when somebody says, oh, well, if you had that issue of Polyhedron, and you're going, but I don't. I mean, hey, I had a lifetime subscription to Polyhedron, and there are issues they didn't send me. Some of them with my stuff in it. So I know how these people feel. But I mean, we will try and make it all available. Now, given infinite time for me, I would go back and rewrite and expand every single one of those articles. So if you went and said, but I already own it. I know the Dragon magazine is piled in a box somewhere over there in that other room and I can't get to it right now. I don't want to buy it again. And then I could say, but I've added stuff. Added stuff in response to not your, but other gamers' questions. So it's stuff that, was really missing. And then you discover that other gamer was a geologist who wants to know why there's so much schist in this rock. And you're going, huh? Like I care? But sometimes other gamers will have the same interests as you. Like, so why the hell did he open that door? Or why did they put that in the dungeon in the first place? They have to live there.
Yeah, that's always the big question.
And so I need to put in an explanation. That's my job. You can say my explanations for the birds, then I'm crazy. Well, I know I'm crazy, and I know it's for the birds, but isn't it a cool explanation?
I don't know. Obviously, not everything needs explaining 100%. The idea that Tolkien died before he could even, whether he chose to just stop at the point that he did, or whether he would have ever written any more, that's immaterial now. But like you say, the appendices, the unfinished tales, that has always given readers of fantasy fiction such interesting debates to have. Whether it's something as simple as what actually goes on in Angmar then. If there's a Witch King, what is he the king of? What was he? There's no humans that come from up there, so what the hell's up there? And
that's true. And I think Tolkien did want stuff to remain mysterious. He talked about that in an essay, that you have to leave them wanting more. You have to leave some mystery. And of course, that's one of the problems in the realms, because a novelist wants to leave something fuzzy, or, you know, the lady in the tiger, did he or didn't he? You know, only her hairdresser knows, sort of thing. You know, the writer wants to leave something ambiguous so you can put your own interpretation, but the gamer needs to know how many hit points exactly when, and in room 3, how many trolls there are. Whereas I want to use Elminster or other unreliable narrators, and that's where Elminster came from. I didn't want him to be the hero of books. He was supposed to be like the old storyteller. And he was supposed to say, there are rumors of trolls and those abandoned ruins, you know. Not, there are 3 trolls in room 6 and their hit points are, you know. I wanted to leave it for the Dungeon Master, because in the old days, everybody read Dragon, players and DMs. And if I spell it out, then the players know. But if I give a hint, then the players know that maybe their Dungeon Master will have that be true and maybe not.
It's why my favourite source books for the realms, next to the Faiths and Avatars book, which is beyond superb, I think. There's only one other deity-based book that's comparable, and that was a Rifts supplement from way back when. But the Faiths and Avatars was superb. Were the Volo's guides to the realms, because everything is hearsay, everything's conjecture. You do end up with statted artifacts and various NPCs, but most of it is told in the first person by Volo, who is an unreliable narrator at best, who's clearly not well liked by most people who consider him a nuisance. And yet, obviously, some tavern keepers, some mayors are going to be aware of this travelogue chap, and are going to want to butter him up a little, so that when they write about when he writes about their establishment, he writes a favourable appraisal. So I've done it in my game where a couple of players have had one of the Volo's guides. They've gone to one of these shops that he's spoken most highly about, and it's a complete and utter tip. The owner is in fact a crotchety old bastard who wants to mug you and kill you. But when he heard Volo was coming, he did the store up, and since then, foot traffic has come in. I'm sure a lot of role-playing stores have done that in there.
Sure.
Yeah, but.
So now your players know that they should say, I'm Volo's updater, his follow-up man.
Yeah.
You know, Volo? You know. But I worked on both Face and Avatars. I was handing Julia Martin, who was Eric Boyd was phoning me from Ann Arbor every weekend, saying, got a minute, Ed? And we'd talk about stuff. But Julia was the in-house person, and I was just throwing my notes at her, just piles of notes on all the gods. And the one thing that I regret that we haven't done yet in the game is we went first for the gods and their avatars. Odin throws his, it never misses and it does this. I could care less. I don't want the gods on stage except as, a voice from the altar sort of thing. I want the priests. I want to know what they wear, what they can do, what they can't do, what their laws, their ethos governing them, like you shall not kill cats, that sort of thing. What they will say to other people. Thou shalt face east, wash twice, and make sure you don't miss this prayer. I want all the prayers and the rituals spelled out. And then I want to know what behind the scenes, because we already know that in the realms, the power of a deity is related to the power and influence of their church or their worshippers, their lay worshippers. And everybody worships all the gods. That's the thing I keep having to sort of remind many gamers who are monotheists and say, yeah, but I don't believe in... Yes, you do. If your character is in the realms, you believe in all the gods. They're all real. And, you appease this god by making an offering. I'm going on a sea voyage. I appease Umberlee, because I don't want to drown. But I'm a farmer, so I spend most of my time making offerings to Shanti. That sort of stuff. Oh, I'm being called into the militia. It's time to make an offering to Tempest. That sort of thing. We all believe in all the deities, but it is necessary to know what the secular aims of each priesthood are behind the scenes. Your pope, your prelate? What are they really after?
Well, it's funny you say that. I recently uploaded a video about my two favoured deities of the realms in terms of the lore surrounding them and how I've used them in role-playing games, being the Church of Ilmater and the Church of Myrkul. And they're pretty much diametrically opposed, but but at the same time, you can see the two faiths working together in a hospital or
Sure.
in a hospice specifically,
Yeah.
I suppose, quite easily. But I was talking about I think it's the town of Redansir on the Dragon Coast, and there's a church of Ogma there. And contrary to the litany of the Church of Ogma elsewhere, perhaps, they have a dire need to clamp down on the free flow of information in that town, because it all gets exchanged for free in the local tavern house, big upended longboat, and everyone is quite happy to chat about the local gossip, the rumours from Westgate and beyond. And it kind of depowers the Church of Ogma, because no one's going there to find out the truth of it all. And so the Ogmanites want to clamp down on free press and free knowledge and make people pay for it. And so the idea that just because one cleric of Bane says that you should do things one way, to his various vassals, that you must do this on this day and this on this day, doesn't mean that the priest of Bane in the next city over isn't going to be running his church entirely differently. He is very unlikely to commune with his god directly on a day-to-day basis, and it being a deity, Bane is unlikely to care if his priests are subjugating people and proving tyrannical, and as long as they're not killing cats, as that is of course in his scripture, then he doesn't care. You're fulfilling his will, and you're citing his name, and you're making people fear him. So yeah, do what thou wilt, as long as it makes people bloody miserable in so doing.
Sure. Now, there are some things that most temples do, regardless of what god is being worshipped. They are the postal service, or rather, the message drop, the letter drop for people. Like caravan merchants may carry messages, but they quite often pick them up at temples or drop them off at temples. And you go there and you make an offering and you say, "Any word?" And the priest hands you the word, sealed. He may have read it, but it's sealed now. In fact, almost always he does read it, because that's how they gather intelligence. But okay, so there's that. It's also a small version of a bank, like a small lending thing. It's also the small healing, healing for hire thing. So all of these churches do these things on the side, regardless of what deity, because they want to stay in business. And they also buy, sell, and swap vegetables and stuff, because they get paid sometimes by some people in the form of vegetables or whatever the person produces, because they don't have ready coin. So they're also money changers as well, and swap meat artists. They and that's also how they feed themselves. So there's all this stuff going on as a sideline, and so you can have the Talos or another destructive deity who still has a farm, a temple farm, like all the other farms, because they've got to eat, And you can go buy vegetables. And Talos would frown upon those vegetables being stuffed full of razor blades or poison, or whatever, because that costs worshippers. You don't mind killing off worshippers when they exalt the deity in approved ways, but you don't just want to weaken the population, with the exception of Talona, for whom just spreading disease is her thing. But other than that, and I want all that rich tapestry to be in the realms, and largely because of the code of ethics at the beginning with D&D, and all the controversy from the religious right in the United States about this dangerous satanic game, Dungeons and Dragons. It was like, you can't portray priests or churches or the forces of good in an unflattering or corrupt light. So let's just not talk about them at all. So that's why they were not in the game for so long, which is why when Faces and Avatars arrived, it was like, oh, at last, because so many gamers have been waiting for these essential detail that was sort of missing. Now, that doesn't mean you have to run your game with religion being in it at all. Look at the Lord of the Rings. Yes, we have forces of good and forces of evil, but we have nothing in the way of organized churches. They're not in the setting. That's okay. You can do that. But again, in the same way that D&D has demons and devils in the game, not to rile up ministers in churches so they can say things from pulpits, but for people who wanted to play a paladin and go and harrow hell. That's why it was in the game. Do Roland and Charlemagne. Gary said so, but you might not want to have that in your game, so you might never use them. And the same way, for writing for the realms, I'm trying to put everything in there, but you don't have to use it. You can do a game. In fact, for years, I ran a one-on-one game with one player, one DM, in which was magical research in an urban setting. One person who had a talent for the art, but trying to take themselves from nothing, build themselves up into an accomplished wizard by apprenticing, by research, by experimentation, by borrowing and stealing these little things here, cat fur, stuff like that. Like you snatch somebody's cat in the street and you cut a few chunks of fur on it, and the thing scratches and meows and runs on, but you've got your fur, and you take it home and use it, sort of thing. That sort of stuff. And which some people would say, well, that's deathly boring, because they want to play D&D like a hack and slash session, and they want to go through the mines of Moria or wherever, and they want to kill things,
But they can. That's why the world is so big.
Yeah.
There's room for everyone.
Room for everyone. That's it exactly. Yeah.
Well, as is clear, I do have a lot of love for the Forgotten Realms, not least because my first Dungeons and Dragons game, the first Dungeons and Dragons game I played, was set there. And my character, an adult abjurer by the name of Chemed Evening Star, the rest of the party never actually were able to trace whether he was at all connected to the haunted halls of, but he would offer them a sly wink and a smile whenever asked. He was one I held on to for many, many years, up until the point when he broke a staff of power in the Underdark. It was a noble. It
was a blast.
It wasn't a noble sacrifice, actually. He had a great deal of prejudice to him. This is where I suppose we could talk about alignment, but just because someone isn't evil doesn't mean they can't hate a certain race if they feel in their mind they have a justification for doing so. And due to various issues that Chemed had, he had something against the Dark Elves, the Drow, and so he wanted his final act, no matter what, to be to destroy a city of Drow, and he had already mastered the art of teleportation through studying under one of the Zulkirs of Fae. That took an awful lot of bribery and a lot of roleplay, but very good fun. And mastered the art of teleporting without error. He knew exactly where he wanted to go. A sort of supporting pillar in one of the largest Drow cities. On his deathbed, as he was dying after one adventure too many, he teleported himself away and snapped the Staff of Power. And no one knows what happened to the Drow, but it probably wasn't that terribly pleasant.
It's characters like that make you realize how little you've accomplished. Me, I want to die more like Tyrion Lannister in the HBO version of Game of Thrones. However,
he was he had a life full of love and friendships, and had set up his own business, and it was the kind of role playing game I love, and I can look back on that as my introduction to role playing, and see that the GM that I was fortunate enough to have was putting in all of those things other people deem inconsequential, the run-of-the-mill lifetime things. But Chemed, he was still a magic user, he was still a paranoid abjurer, he was determined that his final act of defiance, he wanted to go out with a final act of defiance, and so he did. The likelihood is that 10 dozen priestesses of Lolth said, the ceiling's coming down, can you support that? And suddenly 100 walls of force were erected, and nothing happened. But Chemed didn't know that, so it didn't matter.
Well, there's a farmer who lives down the road from me who produces cattle for slaughter. And he says, I like to think of it, they have long, rich lives, ending with one bad afternoon. So there you go. we should all claim as much in life, and Red Evening Star obviously did, right?
Yeah, well, exactly.
A rich, full life, accomplished what he wanted to accomplish.
As far as he was aware. Who knows what afterlife he would have gone to. No one ever tried to resurrect him. I don't think it's possible to resurrect someone who's been disintegrated by an exploding staff of power. I would say not. Or at least you'd need another receptacle.
He could reincarnate.
He could, but, well, I'm just thinking, he used to... His primary deity was, being a magic user, Mystra, although only possibly through mercenary sense, and Sean Dackle because he had a great sense of wanderlust, and because he was constantly running away from things. Wanderlust, as I say.
Well, there's also reincarnation. And actually, one of the books coming up in the Sundering you might want to read, I'll say no more, other than to say it might touch upon character returns.
Ah. Well, because this is something we've discussed on YouTube. There's many role-playing game vloggers now, as the term is, and we discuss role-playing to death. And the subject of death in role-playing games has come up quite often. And in Dungeons and Dragons, how little death can actually mean. It's one of the reasons that I really do limit things like resurrections and raised dead. So I was running a Planescape game over Skype, and considering it was Planescape, it was in the plains, you would imagine resurrection should be pretty easy to come by. One of the characters was desperately trying to resurrect one of the other player characters, and there were very few priests equipped or willing enough to go through such a trying ordeal. And I like to think that bringing someone back from the dead should be not only trying for the person trying to do it, but also for the soul that's being wrenched back from whatever afterlife they were possibly enjoying or suffering. And there's going to be things that are trying to keep hold of that soul as well.
Well, there's also the fantasy trope of the deity sending the soul back. You have unfinished business,
Yeah.
Or you have more to do for me, and that might not be as much fun to role play, but yeah, that's also there. Anyway, yeah.
Yeah, I've lost my train, but well, yeah.
Well, that's okay. My mind was derailed years ago. It happened in arithmetic class very early on. The teacher was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sex. That's exactly where mine got derailed. I don't know about yours, but
yeah, long division got very messy. I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, I particularly appreciate in the realms the minutiae that is gone into, especially on Candlekeep, where you might describe what a man in Elversalt's garden ornaments look like compared to a man in Zentil Keep's garden ornaments, where garden ornaments are verboten. Possibly.
Yeah. Again, you don't have to use it. It's just there if you're in a hurry. Oh, good, somebody's done it for me. Thank you. That's what it's there for.
Well, role-playing has, of course, come on leaps and bounds with Skype, with MMORPGs, print on demand, of course, through Drive-Thru-RPG, PDFs of role-playing games now, as you say, Forgotten Realms products and Dungeons and Dragons products are going to be released by Wizards of the Coast in some format. So I don't know whether it's confirmed yet whether it will be PDF or a product they have licensed and own themselves. But what is your opinion on role-playing today when compared to when you started, and the health of the industry and what comes next?
I know the old saying, magic users have crystal balls. It is a mug's game to look too far into the future. Whatever we confidently predict is invariably wrong. However, in general, I think the industry has become broader but shallower. As in, when I first started as a role player, which sort of grew out of Featherstone-style tabletop wargaming and Kriegspiel-type board wargaming, where you had the general staff in one room and the generals and a referee walking in between to do the fog of war. And then developing out of that, it was a few very dedicated, dare one say fanatical, people having a small hobby. And you can see this very much so with the repeated exhortations. Oh, well, you don't read by learning the books. You go and play with somebody who already knows how to play the game, and that's how you learn it, because it's so complicated, but you'll be hooked, sort of thing. And now at the same time as fantasy has entered popular culture, everybody goes to see the Lord of the Rings movies, and then the Hobbit movies, best December opening of all time domestically in the North America sort of thing, as opposed to, oh, that's that weird fantasy satanic stuff. No, I don't think so. Sort of thing. We now have a broader appeal. In the same way, gaming has a broader appeal, but it has more forms. There are people who play just video games alone, or against people they've never met in the flesh, all over the realms, all over the world, fighting in the sort of interacting in role-playing ways by a computer. There's first-person shooters galore. There's card games that we always had. There's chess that we always had. There's backgammon, and all of this stuff. And then there's all the various forms of role-playing. So it used to be, the hobby is this, the small, that we might fight and feud, and we might come up with our own rule systems. Like Ken St. Andre looking at what Gary Gygax was doing, saying, what a great idea, but you done it all wrong. Here's my rule system. Sort of thing. To everybody's into fantasy gaming or role-playing in one way or not. I see executives in suits paying huge amounts of money to all of these various consultants to come in and do role-playing with their employees about how to deal with, I don't know, difficult customers or sexual harassment in the workplace, which, we just used to get for free, or how to deal with a fire alarm, and everybody role-plays stuff. But the role-players have to be these special consultants who've taken special courses, and I think, whatever happened to all the skinny teenagers or fat guys with beards all wearing loud t-shirts who could role-play rings around these people? Oh, but they're not accredited. So we're having this broader, ever broader, and it fragments in the same way that when I was a kid, there were lots of magazines that everybody read. Collier's and Saturday Evening Post in North America and so on. And now the magazine section has far more magazines, but they have lower circulations and they're specialized. Fine scale modeler, left-handed woodworker. They're specific as opposed to generalist. And that's happening in our industry too. I think one of the trends that I was advocating since I was a young child and needed to play games at lunch hour at school was to have more and more serious war games that I could play in an hour, as opposed to it takes me 4 hours to set up the bloody board, before we do one move. I mean, there were gaming shops I went into in those days who had sheets of metal mounted on the wall with all those counter magnets, holding the game board on the wall and holding all of the units. And you'd come in and spend half an hour making one move and leave. And somebody else would come into the store and make one move, and I used to think, that's cool, but I also want a game I can play in an hour. And maybe not with dyed-in-the-wool gamers. Wouldn't it be cool if I could play a game with my mom or my kid brother without saying, well, I won't really talk about, the stacking effects and attacking across rivers, because that's too complicated for your little brain. I would actually play a game with them that would be just the same in terms of, well, okay, to put it another way, you can play tennis and be terrible. Or you can play tennis and be really, really good. But it's the same game with, in theory, the same equipment. And in theory, a complete novice can walk onto the court and be told the rules. Maybe not all the rules. Sort of like anybody can play cricket, but boy, are the rules complicated if you really want to argue over things, and go through the rule book. They all say, oh, the rules of cricket the laws of cricket are so simple. No, they're not. But I mean, on the basic level of getting into it, you can very easily, darts. at the pub or shove halfpenny. Very simple, but can be very complex. Well, in the same way, getting into the game can be very easy. So you buy a box, and remember Dungeon and all of its very incarnations, and there's a new one now. And I had the pleasure of, looking over Jeff Grubb's shoulder when he did one of the versions. At its heart, a very simple game. The dungeon crawl part of D&D made as a board, something like Parker Brothers Clue. As in, dot, 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 open the door, what's inside? Uh-oh! And then you go on to the next one. I would like more games that were simple to get into, that you can then progress through, whether it's expansion sets that cost you lots of money, or just rules that you factor in, or optional rules that you choose to use, but you can get into the game very simply, because that means new gamers who aren't dyed-in-the-wool gamers, who are the brothers and sisters of dyed-in-the-wool gamers.
Well, that's that weird thing he does up in his room when he closes the door. Mommy's doing it again. His friends would come over and I can hear noises,
Instead, they'd say,
"Oh, my childhood."
Yeah. Yes. But I mean, instead of it, you could say, well, let's not have things behind closed doors. Let's throw the door open and see what Johnny is doing. Oh, that looks interesting. Johnny, what are you doing? Instead of saying, oh, Mom, I can't be bothered explaining it. They could say, sit down. You're going to play. This is what we do. You've always wondered? This is what we're doing. And at the end of an hour or 2 hours later, have the parent going, so, can we play again tomorrow? Instead of saying, oh, well, this is what you've been wasting your time and stunting your growth and hurting your chances at O levels on. Instead they're going, oh, any chance we could play again this weekend? And that sort of thing. I want the hobby to be accessible. And I know that true gamers, and for that matter, anybody who's publishing games, is always going to be coming up with new rules. Because everybody always does. You take the rules of any game and you immediately turn house rules. Things we do and we don't do. Oh, we don't use that. Oh, that's stupid. We use this instead. That's what gamers do. They tinker with things. And that's always going to happen. So sometimes when you're playing, I don't know, Fantasy Forest with 3-year-olds, you're going to be playing it differently. And then if it's a bunch of adults betting on Fantasy Forest and playing the same game, the game is going to be different. But still, we can all get into it. We can all have fun. We can all enjoy. And it's something, the nice thing about gaming is you do it with your brain. You do it with your imagination. It's your creativity, which means you don't have to be the best athlete. If you're in a wheelchair, they're never going to let you out on the field to play footy. They're just not. Because for one thing, the insurance companies would scream and yell. And for another thing, you get massacred. Or you'd become a human pylon that the play would race past because you just can't meet that professional standard athletically. Well, a lot of us can't meet that professional standard athletically. But there's nothing wrong with our imaginations. So we can play D&D or other role-playing games. We can be a part of it. It is the game that everybody can play. And should. When I take over the world, will. No.
It will be mandated, will it?
Yeah. See how easy that was? See that easy step? Over the line, just sidle.
And that's where the world has gone wrong. Yeah.
Yes, not enough games. Why, if the politicians were role-playing around a table instead of sending real people to get shot and killed and blown up? Well, we'd save a lot of money for one thing. Until the expansion set came along, because it would be more expensive.
Yes, then there'll be politicians in space and politicians on vacation.
Oh, did I? Oh, no. You can see why I shouldn't run a gaming company ever.
But I think the idea of making gaming more accessible is largely why a lot of we YouTube RPG community brigade people do what we do. We get a lot of messages, we get a lot of comments from people who have stumbled upon our videos and they are intrigued by what we're saying, the colours we are painting, with our minds, with our prose, the fact that we are able to lure them into a fantasy world just through what we're talking about. And I think it's we are doing a lot of favours for the gaming industry. I believe it, I'm not asking for thanks. I think it's very...
Thank you!
No! I think it's an interesting
Thank me
medium.
before I game again.
It's an interesting medium, and it's an interesting way that things have changed, because 10 years ago, very few people that I know of in gaming would have stood up quite proudly, put their face on something and said, I game, why don't you? You can do this, this, and this. It's so much better than that, doing that, that, and that. And yet more and more people are appearing in mediums such as YouTube quite proudly and stating, I'm a role player and this is why. These are the benefits that I can get out of it. That you are not only having fun, but it's a fantastic way of collaborating. It's a fantastic way of using your imagination, being creative, being able to socialize with people. Just that there are so many benefits to role playing, whether you are playing grim and gritty games or hilariously camp sci-fi games, which are some of the best kinds of games. I love Flash Gordon as a setting, and if there was ever a Flash Gordon role-playing game,
Flash Gordon.
I have far too much love for Flash Gordon, and it's nothing to do with him being an Aryan Superman. He is. There are so many wonderful things about that setting, and if there isn't a role-playing, or if there has never been a role-playing game of Flash, and the universe of Mongo, there should be. There definitely should.
There is.
There is.
There is. Yes.
Ah.
From back in the dawn of time, back in typewritten and mimeographed rules. I have one somewhere. You see, my father was a Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers fan because of the era in which he grew up, and I could remember him buying a vase, and one of my aunts saying, "Oh no, you're not going to tell us it's a Ming vase," the usual thing. He said, "Would I take anything from Ming the Merciless and live?" And walked out of the room. And both of my aunts looked at me and said, "What? What's he on about?" And I said, "Oh, you don't understand." and I left the room too, leaving the two of them going, "What is it?" So yes, yeah. Gaming, I think, is.
Yeah. I was very fortunate growing up in a household that, again, my dad was a big fan of the old comic strips of things such as Flash Gordon, and it's stayed with me. And I do argue until I'm blue in the face with people about why Flash Gordon is a better movie than any of the Star Wars films.
Yes, I can see all of the arguments from various.
Already,
sides.
they are making sense in your mind. But yes, without going too far into Ming's palace, I suppose we should go on to the Q&A from viewers. Yes, there has been a huge amount of interest in asking you questions, and
Bring it.
yeah, while I have said to them that I can't guarantee that I could ask all of them, and I also cannot guarantee that my good guest here, Ed, will answer all of them due to non-disclosure agreements, or simply because some of them may well infringe on his being a gentleman. I didn't say gentleman there, I said gentleman about about the works of other authors. I will throw a good few your way. To warm up, let's do a basic psychological Q&A, a quick fire round. I'm going to say a word, and you've got to come up... this is completely on the fly. I'm going to say a word, and you've got to say what comes into your mind first, and let's hope it's not too bawdy. Okay, we'll start with the basic psychologist.
Are you sitting comfortably? Then we'll begin.
Yes, the basic psychologist tropes. So, mother.
I can't say that word. All right, I'll say home and hearth.
Okay, we'll take things a bit more Forgotten Realms now. Fae.
Ooh, slaves and red wizards.
Waterdeep.
The city I love.
Bane.
The big black tyrant.
Zentarim.
Unfortunately, what leaps into my mind is Keystone Cops, but that's the way we've had to portray them. Yes.
This is where the psychologist would say, I see hesitation on the word Zenter. Yes. And how often did you
That was
discuss...
definitely a hesitation, and you have 30 seconds starting now.
And how often did you discuss the Zentrum with your mother? On to the Q&A. Charles Wensler Jr. asks, what is happening with Castlemourn?
Castlemourn at the moment is on hiatus because I have so many irons in the fire, I can't do everything. And because I believe the sales of Castlemourn, I don't know them. I honestly don't know them. You'd have to ask Margaret for that, Margaret Weiss. Didn't set the world on fire. They were okay, but they didn't set the world on fire. So the way it was left is, Ed, if you wanted to do any Castlemourn novels, that would be cool. And I would say, that's very cool. And then if you can find a publisher for them, okay, we'll get there. And I designed that setting to be a lasting setting for both games and stories. So yeah, I've got a lot of stories I want to tell, and I do want to do Castlemourn novels. However, I also have a big new thing that I can't talk about yet that might replace Castlemourn. You never know. So yes, I do intend to do more Castlemourn stuff, both gaming and fiction, but the future will tell.
Okay. From Devin Brizendine, I do hope I pronounced his surname correctly. What is one thing you have created that you wished they would stop trying to improve upon when the newest edition of Forgotten Realms comes out?
Okay. The caveat I'm going to say right off the top here is I do not know if they are going to try and improve it when the next version of the Realms, or for that matter, D&D Next, the rules come out. I don't know if they're going to deal with it. But there are two things I wish they'd stop trying to improve upon. And one of them is Spellfire, and the other is Wild Magic. Because when we first introduced them, we introduced them with caveats and drawbacks and disadvantages, and they immediately became, let's fix this up so players can have it for their characters. No, don't go there. That will be a train wreck waiting. Oh, bam! There was the train wreck. I warned you. Bam! There's another one. Oh, and you're building a new one so you can have another train wreck. How nice. That was one of them.
Okay. And Jeffrey Boyd Garrison asks, ask Ed if he knows what an Aquanaut is.
Yes. Well, I know several things that are Aquanauts. But the thing that came to me was people who explore the deep sea trenches. And probably have to worry about tentacles from time to time.
Oh, very good answer. And Jeffrey Garrison also asks, do you ever feel like, this is kind of covered by the last question, the second last question, but I'll ask it anyway. Do you ever feel like the Forgotten Realms franchise has taken your ideas in directions which you found disappointing? I suppose Spellfire in that respect would cover that if you weren't happy with it. But if so, which developments spawned from your creation made you cringe the most?
I don't know that anything really made me cringe except coming across the phrase Harper Troopers once. I thought, oh no. Harpers are like the Sierra Club. They're not like American Civil War troopers galloping over the hill. But you see, the thing is, the whole point of opening up the realms, making it a published world, is that other people would work in it, and they would do things in it that I wouldn't have done, so that the realms could surprise me, which it never could when I was the sole creator, and also it would be broader than it would be with just me as the sole source. I wouldn't become the bottleneck that inevitably, for instance, Gary Gygax became for Greyhawk, because he was only one guy, and he was trying to run the company and write this stuff, and, he couldn't do it all. So people ended up waiting and waiting and waiting for products like Castle Greyhawk, because he just couldn't get around to everything. So I can't really, having agreed to that, I can't really kick when people go ahead and do things with it. I do think over the years, there has been too much emphasis on the gods and reshuffling the gods and doing things god on god, as in, let's have a war amongst the gods. Let's have this god kill that god. And it was like, that I thought that was a needless arms race, and it took the focus away from what your player characters do and the secular authorities. I don't want your player characters to be able to just tramp all over the countryside because they are giants and there's nobody else that matters in this world. I want the kings and rulers of this world to be formidable and maybe be a challenge you'd like to negotiate with or manipulate or avoid rather than crash into the throne room and take them down because you're the heroes and nobody can stop you, right? I would like more role-playing opportunities than just that. But I want that to be the focus. The big and little wheels, secular, mortal, on the face or under the face of the realms, not always the deities. There was this sort of arms race up to the deities and endless debate and questions about things that should remain debatable and questionable. The origins of this god, and which came first, the chicken or the egg. Who would win, Bane or Cyric? All this stuff, and it was like, who cares? I mean, yes, that's something priests will debate, but if your character isn't a priest, you're literally wasting time around the campfire or over tankards talking about it because it's something that you will never settle. And hopefully your dungeon master will not stoop to having Bane and Cyric show up at the tavern to, say,
In Avatar form,
you could get a reputation for ruining taverns that way. I would think that it should be the things that matter to your player characters more than the things that matter to the gods. God should remain. They can't still have that aura of mystery and wonder if they're like the next door neighbor who you see him go out, pick up the newspaper and pee into the garden every morning. Then where's the mystery anymore? You need the god to be very mysterious and mighty and beyond you.
Well, it's interesting you say that I've said before, one of my favourite religions is the Mykulite religion. I like the idea of, extortionists in the service of the god of the dead, in that they will bury your loved one and they will bless the grave and make sure that body is never brought back as undead. But only if you pay them, well enough, because they're a business, as you say. And stemming from Myrkul, of course, and going on to the idea of, I suppose, of humanizing deities to the point of them losing their awe. There are always a lot of questions, and it speaks to the popularity of the gods in the Forgotten Realms, obviously, about the origins of the Dark Three, of Bane, Bhaal, and Myrkul. And while I am fully aware that the entire thing is under lock and non-disclosure agreement key, I do have one question for you regarding that before I get back to the others Q&A. And I suppose it is in a humanizing way, but it's because we always see these gods as omnipotent, omnipresent gods in the Forgotten Realms that can do anything they really want, and you are right to fear them. Even if they're good, you are still right to fear them because they could smite you with but a whim. Is the idea that these gods, Bane, Bhaal, Myrkul, for instance, were at one point mortal. I think that's an attractive feature to a lot of people about those three in particular. Those three, not only were they mortal, but they quested together. And the idea is that they were evil in terms of alignment, that they were three evil adventurers, which is something that's pretty hard to come by. And I suppose my question revolves around, well, were they necessarily evil? And while I'm not looking for any sort of realm-shattering, the way I picture it in my mind, for instance, is power corrupts, of course. And whilst we know that Bane was a tyrant beforehand, and Bhaal may well have been an assassin, and Myrkul a necromancer, that doesn't mean that these people, just as Semimon of Zensil Keep has a wife, it doesn't mean that these people don't have families. They don't have descendants. And that they don't have loved ones or motivations, inclinations apart from I am God of the dead or I am God of tyranny. And maybe I've answered my own question, but I'm just interested to know, Were they, or in your mind, in your realm's lore-filled mind, were they these multifaceted human beings, we presume, who had loves that they and losses and yeah, and they weren't necessarily just out and out evil forces of nature that they became as gods?
I think they were. And I think what you saw there was men who got increasingly embittered by the loss of loved ones and by the vicissitudes of life, people crossing them, things going awry. But what was different for the Dark Three than for most mortals is there was driving ambition, hunger for power, and a willingness to do anything to get it. In other words, to experiment with things, not just to do the, oh, well, I will assemble I will kill a king and take over a kingdom. I will assemble an army and I will do this. Instead of the empire building, it was, no, there must be a way past that. The gods are more powerful than kings. How can we get there? And they pursued their ambition. And it was, be careful what you wish for, sort of thing. And that's why Jurgle is portrayed the way he is. It's like, oh, be careful what you wish for, boys.
Well, yeah, so 2 out of 3 of them didn't exactly end up in a particularly happy way.
Do you remember the Niven and Purnell novel, Inferno?
I have not read it, no. But...
Oh, okay. There was a recent sequel, but it was... The basic plot concerns a science fiction writer. Of course, being a science fiction writer, when he dies, he goes to the uppermost level of hell in the Dante layers, okay? And there he meets Benito Mussolini. And he journeys through hell. So, not having read it, I will not ruin it for you, but I see Jurgle in the position of that Benito Mussolini character. Oh, has a replacement shown up? What use can I make of this? Sort of thing. And I see that as what was behind the Dark Three achieving what they did. Now, I do like the idea of the Roman-like deities are superhumans, as in their human characteristics to the super nth degree, and so therefore they have human foibles and flaws that we can understand. But I also don't want them to be as headstrong as, say, or as, how shall I put it, bidden by his male organ as, say, Zeus was. Oh, look, here's somebody else I could mate with. Yes. It's been 5 minutes. I would like them to be more veteran campaigners. They are now caught up in a game that they can either succumb to utter boredom or play the game, and the game being this eternal war for domination and influence against and with their fellow deities, which it is bad form and dangerous to break out into open violence against fellow gods. You don't walk up to another god and hit them. You direct your worshippers, your mortal worshippers in the realms, to go and smite their mortal worshippers, because there is a referee in the form of Ao, which we tend to want to talk about as little as possible, but he's there as the sort of reminder there's a referee, pretty much. And it's hopes that the reminder there's a referee will keep people more or less in line. And what we see over and over again with the Tablets of Fate and so on is that certain deities are willing to break the rules, but they always pay for it. So the other deities are going, okay, that's not the way to go. Let's try this other way. And that's where the great game, the big dance goes on that all mortals are caught up in. But again, your dungeon master then decides, do I want this to be a major threat in my campaign, or do I just want to ignore this? And it goes on in the background, and we read the published products and all this stuff about the gods. It's just sort of passing news and gossip. 42 people were killed today when the mountain beside Mount Everest erupted. And we go, oh, that's nice. It's nowhere near us, sort of thing. I did it. Or, oh, isn't that terrible? Well, they shouldn't live there. The sort of dismissive things that made by people whose concentration is on the here and now, arguing about a fence post at the other end of the village and how somebody moved it. It's what turns your crank for your campaign.
Well, I think that it makes a lot of it makes an awful lot of sense, especially when going back to the time of troubles, the Tablets of Fate, the idea of gods such as Bane and Myrkul, and we presume those were the only two who wanted to steal the Tablets of Fate and rise to a new level of godhood. It's because they were once mortal.
Nah.
And
They were the only ones who wanted to steal the Tablets of Fate. They were the only ones who didn't think stealing the Tablets of Fate was a foolish tactic, more fraught with downside than upside. But you're there. Okay.
Yeah, I get the impression it's because they were once mortal, and when compared to some of the more force of nature-esque gods, such as Talos is not a nice god, but
Right.
Talos is not going to necessarily try and attempt something like that because he doesn't have the drives that a mortal man
That's
might. Whereas in deity terms, the Dark Three had not been gods for very long.
It's true.
And so
their ambition had taken them this far. So maybe it'll work again.
So why cut Bhaal out of the deal then? I don't know whether this is a non-disclosure thing, but why would he have been? Just speaking about in the terms of their characters, what would make Bane and Myrkul ally to steal the Tablets of Fate, hypothetically, and cut out their long-serving loyal assassin follower until the nth hour when they actually needed him?
Well, exactly. You leave him out of the spoils and everything until you need him, because as far as they're concerned, he only does one thing. Now, he would think that was terribly hurtful and incorrect, and they were belittling him, thinking he was a one-trick pony. I kill people, that's what I do, that's all I do. I mean, that would be like saying to one of the Three Musketeers, oh, you stick your sword through people, that's all you do. They would be offended, to say the least. But no, I can dance, I can say witty things, I can empty bottles at 5 seconds, I can jump in and out of coaches, I don't just kill people. Well, in the same way, they were thinking that he was not as subtle as they were, not as witty, not as... he didn't have the foresight and the strategy. And he was thinking, yes, I do. And my foresight and strategy is to have as little to do with this reckless, you're making a mistake here, guys. So again, they were all driven by ambition. But that doesn't mean they were all in accord. You can to take it to the real world, you can have people who are opponents politically, running different parties, and they're all just as passionate about their country, but they see very different ways of running their country and where it should be going in the future. And they're equally passionate. They're probably not all equally right, but who's to say which one is and which one isn't until it happens? The thing that happens all the time. If this monarch, or if this prime minister, or if this Grand Poobah had just lived longer, he/she would have done this, but they didn't, so we'll never know. Sort of thing. And again, what I see here is Bhaal was seeing this isn't the way we should be doing it, guys. And the other two are saying, we can do this. We've done it so far. We got here, we got to godhood, we can do this. They're all old fogies, they don't know what they're doing. We do. And he's going, I don't know if you do. And at the last minute he goes, oh, looks like they're going to pull it off. Okay, I'm in. And they go, oh, now we need you. You're in.
Yeah.
Yeah. See what I mean? But and I want that disagreement to always be there, need not be violent, because it's with those conflicts that we have maximum play possibilities for mortals in the realms. If everything's cut and dried and settled, the same reason when you implied before that, I might not want to answer some questions about authors out of politeness. If we all liked the same thing in fiction, well, I guess one author would have a job until he or she died. And then one more author would have the job. It's the variety. It's the fact that some of us like this but don't like that, and other people it's vice versa, is what makes the whole rich buffet, the cornucopia, the smorgasbord, to be laid in front of us. And I don't want to sacrifice that richness.
Okay, well, on to Lucas Cardozo, who has got a question about the Vancian magic system, in fact. And when making Forgotten Realms, have you ever needed or had the desire to change the magic system to something less about memorization if the system ever became restrictive to the setting? So I suppose that's in terms of, well, the way you would run your games, I presume.
Okay, from the beginning, my realms, as in Wyatt I write personally, not necessarily the published realms, has always had umpteen systems of magic in it. There's been something called table magic that we've never ever gone into. And let's keep it that way for the moment. But the Vancian system was what the game had embraced, and in order to write things in the days of first edition, you adhered to the rules, period, or it didn't get published. And it isn't the way it is now when we have the edition wars and gamers saying, oh, I picked this from this edition and that from this edition, and this stinks, and that stinks, and this is great, and this was okay, this is better than this, but we found a way with our own gaming group to do it even better, so this is what we do, blah, blah, blah. In those days, if you wanted to get published, you matched the rules. And Gary had asked Jack Vance for permission to use the Vancian system, which is very attractive in that once you fire the spell, once you use the spell, it's gone, which keeps your magic user from being the all-powerful tank that dominates everything. And that was a real problem in the early days of D&D, and for that matter, in much fantasy fiction. No, the wizard would show up and save the day, and there was nothing you could do to stop them. They showed up at the end and fixed everything. It was like, so where the hell were they at the beginning of the story, eh? Or we wouldn't have had the story if they... But I mean, we wanted that drawback in, and it's very attractive to have that built in. You can only have this much magic. You can make all these choices, and of course from the beginning I was writing in choices like the symbols Sinostra Dweomer, which is, okay, I need healing, so I'm going to burn these memorized spells that do other things after I cast the Sinostra Dweomer, and it will now channel the magic energy into, now I need healing, so I can now heal myself, because we didn't bring along a cleric, or all the clerics got snuffed 3 rooms ago, and I'm going down if I don't do this. So, I mean, it's like, it's ridiculous that I'm this powerful as a wizard and I've never thought about healing myself because, hey, I've been so vulnerable all my life, sort of thing. So I've always put in little fudge things in the rules, but the Vancian system was attractive because it built in that game mechanic, and it was what the game used. But I've always had all sorts of... I had nature magic that worked differently. I'd had magic that we now see as sorceress magic, before the sorcerer was a character class in the game, where you had the stuff that you had hanging spells that you had pre-memorized and ready and years ago, and you just sort of activate them, or that you have this power and you channel it through the effect you need, as opposed to, I memorized this spell. And of course, the other cute thing about the Vancian system is, in first edition, you could hang a lot of trappings on it if you wanted, like spell ink formulae. And the fact that this person's hold door was different from that person's hold door. So the incantation was different, the material component was different. And if you improvised an incantation at the table, by Son of Bat and Volkers, blah, 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 and the Dungeon Master could say, yeah, right, you get a pink pussycat. Or, oh yes, you blow away the bridge, the Balrog, and all the orcs at once. Wow. Depending on whether he or she liked your improvised incantation, you could do all those fun things with it. So the Vancian system was very useful. But I've always had all systems in the realms, all sorts of different systems running side by side, because I want to keep magic mysterious. And you can't keep magic mysterious if you're publishing rulebook after rulebook specifically telling you what all of the spells do.
Okay, well, I think that's a very comprehensive answer for Lucas. And Players and Plotlines asks, well, in fact, you have answered this, but you may have a different answer slightly to this exact question. I would love to know where Elminster came from, what were the seeds behind his creation, and where Ed Greenwood originally thought the character was going.
Okay. In the United States of America, there was a television show years and years ago called Death Valley Days. And a certain actor, Ronald Reagan, who later became president of the United States of America, was the character, the old storyteller, at the beginning and end of each episode. He'd squint into the camera and say, well, It was a tough time in the valley this week. And then the camera would go up over his shoulder, pan and into the episode. And when you'd watched cowboys shoot each other dead for half an hour or however long it was, it would pan back down and he'd be standing there and say, well, that's what happened in the stay tuned. Tune in next week to see what happens next. And that was Elminster's role. He was my contact who was telling me about the realms, so I could do that unreliable narrator shtick. So he could hint at the trolls in the ruins rather than saying there are 3 of them in room 1 and they have these hit points. I could hint to the dungeon master because all players as well as DMs read Dragon at the time. He was my old storyteller. I intended him to be a static liar. He'd tell us things about realms, but he was filtering it what he wanted us to know.
I'll prefer to think of him as Ron Serling then instead of Ronald Reagan.
Okay. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Rod Serling playing Gandalf. So he glues on the false beard, puts on the fake English accent, and goes, "There's a certain thing that you've neglected." You know, this, and you go, "Oh God, shut up!" You know, and that was what Elminster was supposed to be. At some point, it was decided by TSR that the fiction authors would write books about iconic characters. You may remember a novel called I, Strahd. That was, you know...
Yeah, I can't recall what that was about.
Yeah, yes. But I was asked to write Elminster books. I've been asked to write Elminster books ever since. I sort of begged for the chance to start telling the story of the Knights of Mithranor, and I managed to do a trilogy out of it, but I was gently told, okay, people want more Elminster books, so whatever you write, it has to be an Elminster book. So, you know, for those Realms fans out there who think, oh, Greenwood just wants to, you know, put Elminster, his all powerful, never screwing up hero in yet another book, the old goat rides again. I'm contractually obligated to write Elminster stuff.
And to be fair, he screws up a lot.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. I want him to. I want him to be as fallible as I can get away with. Because although he's cunning and he's wise in terms of he's seen a lot, he's not the only power in the realms. And an awful lot of people don't cooperate with the way he'd like to manipulate them. You know,
the difference between him and Manshoon, of course, is that he won't throw you off a cliff or blast you into oblivion if he doesn't get his way. Necessarily. No, because you see, he's got Mystra looking over his shoulder, regardless of which version of Mystra it is, saying, don't kill off wizards. Don't kill off people who have the talent for the art. Encourage the art. I don't care if it's a tyrant or it's somebody who's going to try and kill you. You have to help them get better magic. That's the overriding thing that's writing him all the time. He's under orders not to, you know, quash. Whereas Manshoon and Szass and other people are cheerful tyrants. I'm going to use my magic to kill people who disagree with me, to enslave people, to gather all the magic items to me, dole them out on a temporary basis to people I like and snatch them back when they misbehave, use them to spy on people. Well, Elminster's okay about the spying and meddling, but he's under orders not to treat people that way. So occasionally it's sort of like, and then Elminster would tell you, the mark of being a real wizard is knowing when not to use your powers. Whereas Manshoon would say, you idiot, blow them away. You know, there's lots of people to kill before lunch. You know, you see that there's the... Would there ever be a situation you could foretell of Elminster, Manshoon, and Szass meeting on common ground and having cause to not kill each other?
Oh yes, I've already written it, and they don't want to publish it.
Oh.
Okay, there is a short story collected in Lord Peter Views the Body, a Lord Peter Whimsy mystery short story by Dorothy Sayers, in which Lord Peter goes to a particular chateau in France during the war. He's trying to get the secret of this weapon from the nobleman, the impoverished nobleman who has developed it. And he's somewhat surprised on his way there to discover that there are seemingly other Lord Peter Whimsies on their way to the same chateau. And they all get there proclaiming to be the real Lord Peter Whimsy. And as a sort of test, the nobleman brings all the wines out of his cellar and has a taste testing, a blind taste testing. And it's a cute little short story, and I wrote a get-together that was something along the same lines. So instead of killing each other, they're sort of trying to booze each other out of the table. And they're all being snotty to each other. Like, oh, well, someone of your background would no doubt discount this as a rather crass wine. If you'd only brought up properly, you might have a different opinion. But, you know, and I did lots of that. And there are some things they wanted to publish, and Wizards 3 and Dragon was one of them. To at that point, they wanted to link all the campaign worlds together. And this is the way of cross-pollinating, to get fans of one say, oh, that sounds pretty cool. Let's find out what this Wardencaden dude is doing, you know, sort of thing. But that within the realms, that when I wrote it, the editors had a good laugh and then said, you realize we're going to deep six this, which is fine. I used to write these hilarious over-the-top sex scenes and so on into all my novels because I knew that the editrix would stand up on her chair in her cubicle and read it aloud for the entertainment of everybody else at TSR, and then they would just, the printout was a fanfold paper, you know, in those days, that she would just tear off this bit and put it in the drawer. It would never see the light of day because it was over the code of ethics and it was inappropriate.
But there's sometimes allusions to that kind of thing.
Yes, sure, but I mean, it was there just for the fun. I'm thinking, oh, you've got to wade through this entire novel I wrote. You deserve some fun, so here we go. It was understood it wouldn't go in the novel. And in the same way, I did get them together. But it was more of a finger exercise for me on how they would interact as characters. It would be interesting reading for most Realms fan because it contrasts the way they would act and speak with each other. They're all three on stage. So instead of saying, you know, that guy looks sort of like Russell Brand, you could have Russell Brand and 2 or 3 lookalikes actually sitting around a table together and say, yeah, they don't look alike once they're together, sort of thing. You know, that sort of thing. We could explore that. But there are lots of things I'd like to write, little you are there moments. You know, behind the bedroom door or whatever. Behind the closed door where they're plotting the overthrow of a kingdom. You are there, the fly on the wall. There's lots of scenes I would like to write that maybe shouldn't be made public because it's better to leave it up to the reader or the game to put their own. For one thing, it handcuffs the dungeon master by saying, okay, this is exactly what they wanted. This is exactly what they said behind closed doors. So this is the way you have to run it. It's far better to say, oh, leave it up to you. Because in your campaign, it might be that so-and-so is stringing such and such along, as opposed to the two of them. You know, and you leave it up to them.
Tetsubo57 asks if you could remove one thing from the Forgotten Realms. Now, as you've already mentioned, Spellfire, and the deities wandering around as mortals from time to time. He says, what would it be? Now, I would like to focus that a bit more, possibly geographically, or you know, is there, or just in terms of an event, is there anything that you would excise?
Okay, I have 3 answers. The short answer, the easy answer, is I would remove stats from the gods. Okay, geographically, I think it was a mistake in style for TSR to tack on too close to real-world analog things like Maztica, like the Orient we got, because they change people from role-playing in an obviously fantasy setting to the eternal gamer arguments. What are you using stirrups for? Stirrups weren't invented until, because it puts us into our history. Now, the 2 designers who were most responsible for those things, who are great guys and friends, but they were former history teachers. So they wanted to put in, you know, things that turned their crank, you know, that they loved from history. But I thought it was a mistake in style. Too close to. In the same way, I thought some of the names that, I mean, I didn't want to have a stallion called Avalon running around the realms because it takes your head away from the realms and into it. You know, I think it was a mistake in style. In terms of geography, I think the thing that I would take away is the electronic Forgotten Realms Atlas we got that showed us the rest of the globe. And one rectangle of it has all of these islands scattered all around, and they form a neat rectangle in the sea. And nobody else has any islands or fjords or fiddly bits. And I'm thinking, I want lots of fjords and fiddly bits, because that's where all the ports are. That's where the rivers come down to the sea. That's where you can have interesting strategic battles and struggles for dominance and trade around that bay sort of thing. Give me more fiddly bits. So I would sort of remove that. Say, well, that was mistaken. Let's open up the unexplored continents to you again. That would be my answer to that.
Okay. Mr. Excelsior 34, he obviously...
Excelsior!
Yeah. I don't say it has a pretentious name, but I call myself the Gentleman Gamer, so...
With this your motto.
Yeah. He says, how do you feel about the direction Wizards of the Coast has taken D&D, both in general and in particular the newer additions to the Forgotten Realms campaign setting? And what improvements or changes in direction, if any, would you like to see happen? Obviously, you're not going to be able to go into too deep a detail into the Sundering, which, of course, is going to see some of those changes taken over. Also, what is your opinion on the state of the role-playing hobby in general? Well, I think we've covered that, so
yeah.
Yes. But, how do you feel about the direction Wizards of the Coast have taken Dungeons and Dragons? And
okay, let me just quickly touch on the state of the role-playing gaming industry. One of the nice things is, even though I think our hobby will always be driven by guys doing stuff in their basements and bringing it to us as new, cool ideas, one of the nice things about the state of the mature gaming industry is that more money can be pumped into things. So we can actually get cool figurines that we couldn't have afforded to have anybody make before. And those people who make the figurines can stay in business long enough that you will actually get all of the members of your Roman Legion made before they go out of business. And you have to hunt for hobby stores for plastic figurines that you can then change with the soldering and all that stuff. So we're getting more money in. So we're getting more lasting games, and we're getting gamers. The gentleman who did the excellent game on London and then did the Pratchett game for Tree Frog, that's sort of there are now gamers I can follow their designs and go, wow, I've got to buy the next one sight unseen because I love everything he's done. I want to play this, and it was an absolute delight for me to see that Lords of Waterdeep game, and now there are going to be expansions. I mean, I sat down and played that, and my original players have played this and said, oh, this is so cool, and they got it. It's right on. And that's sort of like when Elaine Cunningham wrote her first Realms novel, and we said, yes, she's got Waterdeep. She must have been like lurking in the corner while we were playing. She's got it. This is it. She nailed it. It's wonderful when that happens. And specifically for the Realms, I am delighted by the way that the Realms is now getting love from Wizards of the Coast. They are putting out new Realms products, and believe me, they have great things planned ahead that I can't talk about yet. But yes, the Realms is back, baby, and it's going. And whether you like the Realms or not, and there are plenty of people who don't play the Realms, but they buy the occasional Realms product and pillage it for their own campaign, and that's cool. It means we all benefit. There's stuff coming out next year. There's stuff coming out a year after that will be useful to your campaign, whether you play in the Realms or not. We're going to have the chance to go back and detail the Realms again. One of the things that I loved when the stuff we saw at Gen Con this year in the lead up to the Sundering was I was getting to see gorgeous art. And we have an art director in place at Wizards of the Coast, John Shindahedi, who is brilliant and is doing things from the ground up. He's establishing looks for geographical regions and peoples of the realms. So if somebody does a video game, or somebody does a movie, or somebody does a picture book, or somebody, the people from Thay will look right. They will match the novels. They will match the source books. If somebody from Thay picks up a decanter, it will look like a Thayan decanter. That's sort of, and the monsters look the same, and I don't mean absolutely the same. You can always have variants, mutants, and so on. But an owlbear will look like an owlbear, depending on whether you're playing in a computer game, or you're playing it on your smartphone, or you're looking at an illustration in the rule books. It'll be the same. And I love that. We're all getting decent art, and because of, as you can tell just by looking at, say, all of the books that have come out to go with the various Peter Jackson movies, you can't gloss over or fake anything. In a novel, you can. You could say, well, he struck the tinder and lit the fire. In the movie, you have to show the tinderbox. You have to show where he gets it from. You have to show what the wood looks like. How does he light the fire? You know, if it's not out in the howling wilderness, but it's in a kitchen hearth. You know, is there a hook there with 15 plots hanging? You know, because the more visual medium, you can't cheat. So therefore, you have to do more work, and it's being done. And I'm delighted. We're starting to get more places mapped. And of course, it's my secret hope. And talking back to one of the earlier questions, when you said, what are the other things I wanted taken out of the realms? Well, I didn't mind the Time of Troubles. And I didn't mind the Spell Plague, although I minded it more than the Time of Troubles. I did mind that they threw both of those things in before I was finished carpet bombing the entire world with regional source books. There are some places we've never been, and there are some places we've been to over and over. I mean, yes, I want an update on Waterdeep every year, because I'm greedy. But we've never had a Cormyr source book, even though everybody says, we're going to spend all the time in Cormyr. Well, we've never had a source book. And the Tashalar, we've never been there. Border Kingdoms, we sort of got half there and stopped. You know, there are places, the Vilhan Reach, we've seen briefly in 2 products and in fiction, but we've never actually gone there.
No, my location of choice is the Dragon Coast.
Yes.
And not just Westgate, although I do love Westgate, just as a concept. It is one of the most fun places I've ever ran a game. Elversult. I said in a video not long ago, the reason I love Elversult is the idea that it's a city that was once under the dominion of the Cult of the Dragon. A cult operating openly in a city.
Yeah.
How would the civilians be? How would the basic citizens be? And forgetting the Cult of the Dragon's machinations, what is the life of the everyday man in Elversult if the people in your government are sponsored by necromancers, are death worshippers, and then when the Harpers roll in and get rid of this horrible tyrannical government, okay, the government changes, the people stay the same. So how much do they hold over from when the Cult of the Dragon were running? Were all of them necessarily disadvantaged when the Cult of the Dragon was running things? You know, it makes me think of almost concentration camp style living conditions, where a lot of people will have had to have, excuse the vernacular, had to shit on a lot of other people in order to climb up the rungs and stay alive. And now they've got this benevolent government in, and all their neighbours know what they did to get to the position that they now hold, and they're not going to lose. And so, yeah, that idea, the idea of this city that, for all intents and purposes, looks like this wonderful haven, this safe haven where temples to good deities are finally being erected, and Talos and Velsharoon and the like are finally being thrown out, but the people, the taverns are the same, the merchants are the same, the farmers are the same. Are they just going to give up their gods? Are they just going to give up their way of life from before? And all of the Dragon Coast, there's such a contrary feel to me with the Dragon Coast. All the cities, all of the towns, it's like I was saying about Red Unsere and the way the Ogmanites operate there. And even Westgate, of course. It's almost the traditional way of working turned on its head. Westgate is, in my mind, Waterdeep if you removed all sense of responsibility.
Yes. Well, I have 50,000 words at home on Tezir with maps. That was going to be the next city of the realms after Crimmer that was going to be published in Dragon. And of course, when the print Dragon went away and that series sort of ended after one installment, I was going all over the realms filling in cities, and Tezir was one of them. And Priapur was going to be the next one. So, you know,
I missed out.
Yeah. I mean, and you see, that was my sneaky way of getting to detailed places that I'd been told by some designers inside the company, staffers, oh, we're never going to do anything on that. I thought, okay, if I do every single city in it in Dragon, then I can turn around after 5 years and say, hey, would you like to collect these into a book? I'll write, so many more words on the empty countryside in between. Instant source book. It's free. You don't have to pay for it. Wouldn't that be great? And I was thinking that was my sneaky tactic that never worked. But,
Best
but
laid
yeah,
plan.
it would have the Dragon Ghost, yeah.
Rhaegar the Dragonborn, 7 protect us, asks, in the long years since Forgotten Realms began, is there anything you've seen in role-playing games that have followed that you wished you could have included into the setting if you started over, be it a new god, mechanic, class, or creature?
There are lots of things that I have liked and admired, but most of them fit their own settings rather than... I mean, yes, the realms can take everything, like a big stew that you can put everything in. But I would think the one thing that I liked the most was the playing up the crumbling grimoires and the search for arcane and forbidden knowledge that Call of Cthulhu, or for instance, Kenneth Hite did a product for Pelgrane called Bookshops of London. And it was followed up with a guide to London and by others, which I thought were both great. And that sort of thing I would have loved to. I mean, that worked. The atmosphere of that product worked because it's historical. Because there's a map in it that is drawn from history of the real London, and we've just tinkered with it a bit. But it has that feeling, and I would love to have more of that in the realms. Because there was always so much in-your-face fighting going on. Guys running around with swords, hacking up monsters. That we tend to neglect the fact that there are scholars who sit there making war with words and pens just as much and just as often as the guys with the swords, or the gals with the swords. And that's the other thing, gals with swords.
This is BHM, has a few questions for you. And I'm guessing this isn't meant in a phallic way, but what was your weirdest fantasy boner? Although you tell that tale in a phallic way. What was your weirdest fantasy boner?
In real life or in the realms? I think the best one was the European convention who invited me as a guest of honor and provided me with a bed warmer, as in a nice looking lady.
Well, that wouldn't have been in the UK.
No. It was on the continent, and my wife said, who was with me, said, I'm his wife. And this young lady said, oh, that's okay, the bed's big enough for 3.
So to which you looked around, well, she's right.
Yes, well, yeah, how do you answer that? Now, in terms of in the game, I think I would take the boner in the other sense of boner, as in not sexual excitement, but just excitement. I think the biggest one was when the company TSR said that they would publish the realms. Because there was that thrill that finally I'm going to have color maps of the realms that don't have my pencil crayon strokes visible in all the C's and all the green bits and all the brown bits. And further to that, when designers started picking up things I'd done for the realms and running with them in their own directions and producing new regional source books that were things I would never have done and had cool stuff in them. Now, I have to tell you personally, I like those regional source books in inverse proportion to how closely they model real world analogs. If they look like bits and pieces of our real world, just fantasized a little bit, I would say I'm not interested as much. But if they went places and did things that were cool and different, and Spelljammer that Jeff came up with its far out physics, I thought was really cool. I mean, yes, you could say it's nonsensical in one way, but I mean, that was the point. It did things that didn't happen in real life. He often used to illustrate it by saying, the night watchman is smoking a cigarette on board one of these ships in the phlogiston, and he's not supposed to be. And his superior officer appears on deck to inspect, and he sees the guy coming, and he throws the cigarette end off to starboard, says, Evening, evening, evening. Superior officer passes on, and he reaches up with his hand, and the cigarette has circled the ship, come up on the port. He just picks it out of the air and goes on smoking again. Stuff like that. You know, it was like, that is so cool. Now, how can we use that? You know, if you're casting a spell, a hostile spell, or even a benevolent spell, like a healing spell or something, can you send something that circles around the ship and smacks your own person from behind and hits them with healing? You know, stuff like that. It was like, oh, this is cool. And when your mind starts working with possibilities, that's the boner moment. That's the excitement. When you start saying, "Oh, wait a minute," and your mind goes, "Oh," you know, and you start thinking of things. I'm sure it is for other dungeon masters too. When you start thinking of things, that's when things get cool, and you start going, "Oh, yes." Anyway,
Well,
right.
This is BHM also asks if there is one CRPG to get someone into pen and paper RPG, so computer game, a role-playing game. Which one would that be from your perspective?
And I would say, because I'm a Mac guy, and because I have no time at all, because I'm like really busy and have been for years, I haven't played enough computer games for real, as opposed to playing demos and, you know, wandering around in areas of World of Warcraft before they're open to the public for play, just walking around looking at the scenery, which I love. I'm not really competent to answer that question.
I'll answer for
because
you.
I would say, to me, and this is going to be really old school, and this is going to disappoint a lot of people, Riven. Myst,
Yeah.
Riven, and all its sequels, where you wander around and experiment and solve mysteries and try and figure out things. Because if that's the way you're approaching it, that's what I want you to take away for the realms, not the fighting. Because the fighting can get anywhere. You can watch Ben-Hur. You know, you can read any of 1,000 fantasy books, and we all get the basic thing. Oh, the dragon is going to eat me if I don't stick my sword in it. The orc is going to kill me if I don't stick. But in all of those games that Myst spawned, you had to solve problems and figure things out and piece things together. And I want that in my role-playing campaign. I want my role-playing campaigns to be more than just hack and slash. So I want that in them. Anyway, there you go. So yeah, you better answer it for me, because I'm sort of going Call to Arms. I like Skyrim. But again, what I saw of Skyrim was running around, literally running. Your characters runs through the bog. Oh, there's a magic sword just sitting there. What the hell is it doing sitting there for?
Well, that's why I found, and so this isn't just because of the Forgotten Realms element, but obviously it is a part of it. The Baldur's Gate series by Black Isle and BioWare, from in the 90s, Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, were superb series for the Sword Coast. I think they really ignited.
I'm just going to kill this.
That's quite all right. Were superb series for highlighting some of the depth of the Forgotten Realms, even if it was just through the small books you could find in the course of the game that gave you additional lore about Faerun. And the Skyrim does a similar thing, but Baldur's Gate was one of the first innovators for that, so that would be my take. But last one from this is BHM, is whether you use mobile devices or for your role playing, and whether you can see such things being made by game developers. Do you think game developers and publishers will see the mobile market as a way of acquiring new players and customers?
I think they already do. And yes, I think you could definitely, there are games you can play, although, hopefully not Killer or Assassin, the one where you had the photograph of the person and the water pistol, and you in real life, which didn't end well.
Is that Steve Jackson games Killer?
Well, no, people did it long before it was made into an official game. Yes, I think it was Steve Jackson game, but that was already outlawed at most conventions before he made it as a game, because in the United States, there are people who habitually carry guns, like security guards, and who would shoot people who they saw apparently drawing a pistol. It was a water pistol, but never mind. So they'd already said no at conventions. But I can remember very, very, very early Gen Cons in which we did play Assassin and Killer with each other. And other games, I mean, that was just the obvious one that lends itself to, a James Bond style thing. But and Dick Tracy and his two-way radio, which, preceded mobile, iPads and stuff like that. We can, but you can play all sorts of games, not just spy ones. Using them, you can play fantasy games, and yes, I can see that the people who develop such games are looking at the mobile market because it's the one not yet fully tapped source of, and more of the younger generation are living their lives on mobile devices, whereas old fogies like me go, it's a phone.
I have a similar.
It's right. I mean, it's interesting. The rural farmers out where I am, they always run to answer phone because it must be life or death, because no one would ever use the phone unless it was a matter of life and death. According to them, because they would never use a phone unless it was a matter of life or death. It's something they're scared of, something for their wife to answer, or, it's all those women gabbing on the party line again, because everybody's on a party line, so they don't view phones the same way. But as generations pass, there's going to be more and more electronic gaming. There's going to be more and more mobile gaming because it's something to do when you're sitting in the airport or sitting waiting for the train or sitting waiting for the bus, which is the only downtime a lot of us have anymore in our lives. And God forbid we should spend it reading the way that I always used to spend that time, or writing. I used to sit there on the subway, tube, writing in the morning. Or reading, it was that's how I feel my spare time. But I think that's going to be one of the things of the future that people do. There's going to be more and more of it, and there's nothing wrong with that. I have always been a DM who used what you might call audiovisual aids. I had fake coins. I put on music. I occasionally produced artifacts, as in, and he hands you something that looks like this. Plonk, put it on the table, like a key or whatever, or a fragment of a broken sword or something, because it all helps role-play. It causes people to be jolted out of their, so what's on page 36? I'm sure the grenade-like missiles table is somewhere around there. It jolts them out of that into, ooh, I'm actually looking at the thing, okay, a Balin says this, it pushed them back to role playing, so that's good.
Well, I am conscious of how long we have been talking now, and
yes.
while I don't want to cut it to quite short just yet, I will start having to pick and choose from questions. So apologies to any viewers who I don't get to. Hopefully, some of your questions have been answered at some other point during this interview. I'm sure they probably have.
Again.
Let's see. From the Swamper. Now, there's a question submission to a fellow Canadian like Ed, so I thought this would grab your attention. He would ask, when creating a realm for a campaign, what are the key components that need to be addressed in order to best add a sense of realism to it? For example, is government more important than economy or terrain features or average citizen, etc.?
Okay. There is no right answer to this one. Or rather, the answer depends on the style of play. If you're going to have an intensely political play, that matters. I think it's best to design it from the starting point outwards and the play experience first. Your players. Are they hack and slashers? Are they knock on every 10-foot section of wall looking for the secret doors? Do they want their characters to have day jobs and lots of interpersonal relationships with all sorts of NPCs in the village? And do they want to role play those? Hi, I'm back. Sort of thing. Or do they play D&D like a football quarterback in the huddle, saying, okay, now the thief is going to run around the back while the magic user fireballs, and I'll come up the middle with, and some people do play D&D like that. But that would lead to a very different campaign design. Here's what you need. Everybody wants to belong to something or somebody, whether it's your own band of characters or a place or both. Bear that in mind. Everyone loves a mystery. Make sure there's some sort of mystery going on. Everybody wants an escape for real life, so watch your players, and if they need a time to cut loose, or they need a time to relax, or they need a time to laugh, Make sure you give it to them in play and build that in. And then you want this campaign, presumably, to last for a bit. So give them challenges with a clear direction of places to go. Not just their places to go on to, but things to go on to. You know, if they take down the corrupt mayor, well, as they take down the corrupt mayor, the messenger is arriving from the king with the mayor's instructions. Well, there's obviously a place to go on to. You do not want to have a big be-all and end-all, like, let's save the world. Like the Fellowship of the Ring saves the world, or in Dragonlance, they save the world. What do you do for an encore? I guess we save it again. You know, we built in the arms race to too bold and sudden and definitive an ending. So now where do we go from here? You want to build it in so that there's lots of, and this is where having a detailed world like the Realms comes in, or spending a lot of time developing your own. Make sure the player characters really have choices, so they get to decide what direction they go in. Even if you're actually going to throw the same pre-prepared dungeon at them, whether they go east or west from the village they start in, they should feel like they're choosing their own destinies. Otherwise, they're not heroes. They don't feel heroic. They don't, So let them borrow their own problems. And if you, from the very beginning, as I did in the Realms Home campaign, if you role play councils of war, like the Council of Elrond, where the player characters sit around discussing what they're going to do next in character, then they will spin a lot of your adventures for you. They will choose the adventure for you. Oh, let's go there and do this. Then you know where you're going to go next.
Okay, I've got two here that I think I can pass together, and in fact, as I say, a lot of the questions you've answered have actually been asked by multiple people, so I'm sure there won't be too many disappointed among the masses. But the Voice of Reason 311 basically just wants to say this, and I thought it was a lovely message, and I wanted to communicate it. Thank you, Ed Greenwood, for creating such a beautiful and rich fantasy world for all of us to inhabit, and for letting so many other talented individuals contribute to your grand work. I love the Realms. It has brought me endless hours of pleasure, and through it I have had the privilege of bringing endless hours of pleasure to many people who otherwise would never have even heard of such things as role-playing games. I don't think I'm exaggerating when I say Mr. Greenwood has given me a great gift. So,
well, thank you. I feel honored when people say things like that, because that's why I do it. It's certainly not for the money. Okay? I thank you all gamers, because you have taken this world that was just mine, and you've taken it and run with it, and you love it, and you play with it, and it's gone on for years now, and people come up to me and show me their costumes that they have painstakingly put together to be characters in the Realms, and they tell me all about their characters, and they ask me things about Waterdeep, and they tell me about their adventures in Waterdeep, and I feel so honored that I could do this for people, and that people are having fun. If I lift someone's spirits, if I give them a couple of hours of fun, and if I give them an excuse to get together with their friends or make new friends and spend their time gaming, that's my real reward. And thank you very much, and I hope it never ends. I mean, I will end. I will die eventually.
no,
I would like
no.
No. I will just become undead. No, I'm just hoping that the Realms will go on, and people will still be having fun with it years after I'm dead. And it's not like, oh my gosh, this is my bid for immortality, because no, it isn't. But the Realms is a fun thing, and I like to think it's bigger than its creator, because, as you said, it's lots of people have worked on it now, and I've made a lot of new friends all over the world because of it, and thank you.
Well, I'll have two more questions before an improvisational exercise to cap off the interview. And I'm going to have to all but randomly pick these. Firstly, from Onion Kid 99. Which Forgotten Realms culture would you most like to attend a feast celebration thrown by them?
Oh boy. Well, it depends on whether I'm there for the food or if I'm something else. If I'm there for the food, I would probably want to attend a feast thrown by halflings living in the Dales during a decade of prosperity in a good harvest year, if it was purely for the food. If it was for the entertainment, I would like to attend a revel of worshippers of Elistri for obvious creature comforts and scenic delights.
You may look a bit out of place.
As Peter Sellers once said, I just like to watch.
Okay, and let's see. From Hazarbigan.
Oh, wait a minute. Let me.
Okay.
I get Hazarbigan. I would just like to add one thing to the feast. For terms of entertainment, I'd like to attend a noble's revel in Waterdeep when everybody's had too much to drink and they start talking freely and I get to hear things. Because that would be interesting. Okay.
And then you run to Zentil Keep and sell the information.
Of course. Yeah. Of course. Sorry. I interrupted you in the middle of Hazarbigan.
Yes,
so
Hazarbigan. It sounds like a carry-on surname, Dr. Prado, or something like that. I know Mystra. Oh, what do you? No, I know Mystra and the Weave do not exist anymore. But for how long? But since I'm not playing a game post Spell Plague, I have a question about them, to which I cannot seem to find the answer in the books. How does the Weave translate to another plane of existence? And Sigil, for example, being the nexus of the planes, does the Weave exist there as well, or only in realm space? Also, if a GM wants to allow players to travel between various worlds and settings, how is magic reconciled?
Okay, the short answer to the last bit, magic is reconciled the way your Dungeon Master wants it to be. Okay? Okay, that's the cheap and dirty out for all Dungeon Masters to say.
Okay,
you're
we're
not
done.
Yeah. But okay. The people think of the Weave, they envision the Weave as this huge tapestry. And it is. But the Weave is a huge tapestry of sort of like the phone company's web, okay? That is touching individual things at individual points. What it's touching are the flows of energy in the world. Tidal, wind is very powerful. Heat, convection currents, both volcanic and otherwise. Gravity, flowing water, hydropower, all of that stuff. It is tapping the natural energies, and its ways of tapping in all sorts of ways, in all sorts of different places. It is, in effect, the way one set of users of magic, wizards, the users of the art, magic users, if you will, sorcerers also, but sorcerers do it without incantations. It's how they access the natural. So when you move to a different play, when Mystra is the Weave. So when Mystra goes down, it's like the phone lines going down. That doesn't mean all the telephones don't exist, and it doesn't mean all the houses they're in doesn't exist, and it doesn't mean there aren't still people talking to each other. If you're talking to your neighbor on the telephone, looking through the window at them, and the phone goes down, you look at each other through the window and you point at the receiver and go, huh? Then you roll up the windows and start yelling. You can still talk to each other, or you walk over to the other person's house. You can do that. The phone isn't a barrier to you doing it. So there are other ways to access magic than through the Weave in Faerun and elsewhere. All of these other systems, and the Shadow Weave is part of the Weave. It's actually the spaces between the Weaves, the echoes of the Weave. So the Shadow Weave goes down, sort of, when the Weave goes down. But of course, people who use the Shadow Weave claim that it didn't go down. And they're right, because in some ways it was still functioning. In some ways, the Weave was still functioning, even though Mystra was down. And that was because, although Mystra was the Weave also existed around nodes of energy, phase rests and earth nodes and so on, and other places that pumped out. They were sort of pumping energy into the dead phone lines, and therefore a small area was still functioning. In the same way, that will pertain if your character moves to another place, whether it's a city between the worlds or whether it's another plane. Some of the Weave will travel with them. And some of the triggers by which you, as a magic user, can access the energies of this new place that you're in will be so similar to what the Weave does that your weave-based magic will work in that new place. Not all of it, but some of it. Some spells, some schools of spells. Spells will change in duration and area of effect, but still function. Or they may have chaotic effects, like a Wand of Wonder. You know, when you try and cast this thing, you get that instead. It's all up to your dungeon master. But that's the way it works. The weave is sort of like a way of accessing the energies. And those energies, although they may be different from plane to plane, it's very different in, you know, the elemental plane of fire than it is in the realms proper. The same sort of energies still pertain, and the same ways of trying to get to them half work, half function. So there you go.
Okay.
Does any of that make sense? No, of course not. That's why you need me. No.
Yes, and the translation video will be following. No,
Yes.
no.
Yes.
I think that was an excellent.
Oh, it costs $24.95.
Yes. Yes, but the one last thing I wanted to do, one of the questions I've not been able to ask is what is your favourite role-playing experience? But I tell you what, if we ever have a second interview, we will go through that, because I'm sure it will be a very interesting and lengthy tale. But
lengthy. Yeah, I do lengthy. Sorry.
But for the purposes of this improvisational exercise, over the course of this interview, I have dropped in various favourites of mine from the Forgotten Realms, notably Churches of Ilmater and Church of Myrkul, and the Dragon Coast, and specifically Elversult. And my favourite organisation in the Forgotten Realms are the Red Wizards. I love the Machiavellian politicking of the Zulkirs, and yeah, not least Lauzariel, the Zulkir of Enchantment, and how he was portrayed in Lynn Abbey's book, The Symbol's Gift, which more people should read, and it's, you know, they will still be able to find it, but it is an excellent novel. And as your improvisational exercise, Ed, I would like you to craft a tale of using Red Wizards, Elversult, and the faiths, prominently or not, of Ilmater and or Myrkul.
A fictional tale or a Dungeon Master scenario? Or
entirely up to you. Entirely up to you.
Well, as you know, in recent years, some Zulkirs have found Thay to be a rather inhospitable, or increasingly inhospitable place, because they and the Tharshianesses and Tharches have found Zastam taking more and more power. So, of course, some Zulkirs fought him and died. Some Zulkirs decided to relocate and hang on elsewhere, waiting for him to inevitably fall, as all tyrants do. And what better place to relocate than an overshadowed backwater of the Dragon Coast, Elversalt, because Westgate gets all the press, and Suzail, and Marsember, and the big ports, Serloon and Selgant of Sembia nearby. So why not quietly relocate to Elversalt, where, after all, you are strategically located for trade over to the Heartlands. And we have the Zentrum fighting many battles up in the north to establish their caravan route. Why go to all that trouble when you could subvert existing caravan costers and you know, but you don't want to do that as saying, hi, I'm a Zulkir of Thay, I'm taking over, because that would lead to people boycotting you or fighting you or resisting you just because of who or what you were, particularly if they thought that meant you would be dealing in slaves or be looking to kidnap people to become slaves. Well, where better place to find willing slaves than amongst the most loyal devotees of Ilmater? And if anybody came after you when you were assisting these people into their slavery and using them in your trading activities to load and fetch and carry under two heavy weights until the heavyweights slam them to the ground and break some of their limbs, and oh, that's okay, that's just an offering to Ilmater, is it not? You know, and should someone locally object, or even the agents of the other powers around, like, for instance, High Knights, you know, coming for a look from Suzail, or people coming for a look from Westgate, or the Semians coming for a look to see who these new competitors are, well, then, of course, it would only be a holy service to Myrkul to remove some of these inconvenient people who came to Elversult. So I can see that by subverting these two churches, not telling either the two churches that you're doing so with the other, of course, but just working through them both, this would be the best way for a Zulkir to actually maintain real power or build real power without advertising who and what they are for all to see. And I could see that they would want to recreate what they loved of Thay, locally, within their walls, within a fortress, perhaps. So they would, a little piece of Thay would be kindled inside Elversult, inside the walls of a compound, a fortified compound, perhaps several fortified compounds. And you would have Zulkirs who had long-standing rivalries and feuds, agreeing to cooperate with each other for their mutual benefit at the beginning, but as time went on, they would begin to feel the friction of working with someone who is a traditional foe, whose family is a foe, whose background is a foe, whose portfolio is a Zulkir as opposed to yours, who's getting more slaves than you are, and of course, inevitably, they would face the possibility of acting against each other. But it would be a mistake to do what we did before, which is what let Szass take over by playing us off against each other. So why not hire expendable adventurers, like, say, these player characters here, to act for us in our little skirmishes with each other? And why not choose battlefields that aren't either of our compounds, but are, handy to Elversult? The other ports along the Dragon Coast. Perhaps the mansions of some of these wealthy people who've moved out of Westgate because Westgate was too hot for them. Why don't we take over their mansions? Oh, and their riches. Oh, and their servants. Oh, and their caravan wagons. And why don't we why don't we send these adventurers to do it for us, so if anything goes wrong, we can disavow it, acknowledge, and it's what they did themselves. In other words, we'll frighten them. See, I could see a burgeoning campaign just out of the blue. And then, of course, Szass is going to see all and not be idle. And Szass is always looking not just for new slaves or people to dominate. He's looking for a few good adventurers, to paraphrase and mangle what the U.S. Marines are after. So, successful player character adventures, they must be given the proper choices.
Excellent.
And the proper missions. There you go.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that, Ed.
A pleasure.
Much appreciated. And so, yes, I will call this interview to an end now. But yes, I thank you very much for your time, and yes, for agreeing to do this.
My pleasure. This was fun. Let's do it again.
We will. We shall do it again. My next challenge, I'm quite happy to announce here. My next challenge, I don't know whether it will be successful, because he has been notable for occasionally not wanting to do interviews, is Sandy Peterson. But that is going to be the next gambit, if I can somehow cajole him into doing the interview. I will have the triumvirate of Mark Reinhagen of Vampire the Masquerade, Ed Greenwood of the Forgotten Realms, and Sandy Peterson of Cthulhu. And then I will run a game for all three of you over the internet, in which you play very depressed vampiric elves going into a dungeon to fight Great Cthulhu.
Okay, works for me.
Yes.
Can I play Cthulhu? I've always wanted to play.
But thank you very much, Ed. It's much appreciated.
My pleasure.
Okay.
Okay.